Okay, so now let's actually work through an example of a word study. Before I do that, I want to tell you a quick story. When I was in Bible college, I learned math from a gentleman who helped put the Apollo mission, NASA mission Apollo, in space. And he was telling us that they weren't really using calculators. They were doing a lot of work by hand. And so I always thought it was really interesting that human beings put a person on the moon using a lot of pen and paper, pencil and paper. And if you watch, the Apollo movie, then you can see them trying to do some math in a hurry with these slide rulers. In any case, I'm telling you that because today it would be absurd to think that you're going to go into, put a man on the moon today using pen and paper. There's so much available to us as far as software and computers goes that if you're going to make that your goal, then you have to invest in the tools available. It's the same thing for Bible study. When I was in Bible college, not very long ago at all, Bible software wasn't very impressive, and so we learned how to do a lot of work using just physical books. But since then, Bible study software has really become a very, very intuitive and powerful tool. You trying to get through Bible college or become a Bible teacher without software, Bible software, is like trying to put somebody on the moon today using pencil and pen or pencil and paper. I don't recommend it. So if you don't have it, don't eat for a couple of months. Save up your Christmas and birthday money. Maybe rob somebody, but do whatever it is you have to do to get good Bible software. It is really an absolute necessity. It is your tool to do your job. So as I'm going to demonstrate it this way, even if I wanted to show you how to do it using books, I can't, obviously, through this medium, and I don't think I ever would actually do that. It is just such an inefficient way of handling your time. So let's do a word study here. I'm choosing to go through 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 17, where it says, "If any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple is holy, and that is what you are." Now, this is an important passage because in context, as we will look in a second, it seems that Paul is saying that Paul is referring to Christians when he says that Christians who destroy the temple of God, God will destroy. So this can be taken to be understood that you could lose your salvation under circumstances where you are being a destructive force within the body of the church. Now, shout out to my students, Tal, Richard, and Lance. This was a major conversation in our Pauline Epistles class, and that's why we're discussing it here. That's why it's an easy example for me to use. Now, so how do we do it? Well, the first thing we do is we look at the purpose, the content, and the structure or the flow of thought of the entire letter. The entire letter itself is Paul's writing to the Corinthians about different issues occurring with the church, and this chapters 1 through 4, in which we are now, is the first issue, which is there's divisions within the body of Christ. The church is being split up into fractions, and they're each aligning themselves with a Christian leader like Paul, Apollos, Peter, and Jesus. And Paul is trying to say, no, don't divide yourself amongst us. We're all equal servants of Jesus, and so none of us should be esteemed more highly than the other. We're all just serving God. Now, as part of his argument here in chapter 3, he explains to them that they're equal servants, and then starting in verse 10, he gives this illustration of these pastors like Apollos, Paul, and then others are building up a church, like a physical temple, and God is going to test each man's work. Now, the reason Paul is probably saying that God's going to test their work is because there are some leaders who are not good leaders. And Paul's going to be giving this example to really warn leaders who are doing a bad job or who are destroying the building of God. He's going to really give them a warning. And so Paul he paints this illustration of Christian leaders building this church, constructing this church, and then at the end of time, God is going to test the quality of each man's work. As you can see here in verse 13. I'll make this big. Now, Paul says when God tests the work, if he's going to burn it by fire. If a man's work is good, then he will receive his reward. Now, if a Christian leader, his work doesn't survive, the leader will suffer loss. That is, somehow he'll be hurt in some way. It's difficult to understand what he means by that. But he is clear that the leader himself, or that Christian himself, will be saved, even though it's somebody barely escaping through fire. So one of the reasons why I think it's so important to look at context is because this is going to help us understand what Paul says in verse 17, when he says that this leader himself will suffer loss, but he'll make it into heaven, just barely. And that's because in verse 17 or verse 16, God is being really picky about the quality of the work that each man does, because the body or the congregation is the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in them. So that's why God is being real picky. Having understanding of the purpose, the structure, and the content is going to help us understand what Paul means in verse 17. So that's the first step.